Hello again.
Well, good morning. How's everybody doing?
It's good. Thanks for having us back here in Utah.
Well, it's been 3 years, huh?
Yeah.
I remember the first time we spoke, it was kind of like, what's this place, Salt Lake City, Utah, doing with, UFC and pay-per-view, and I tried to allay your fears, and then we had a great event last year, and so, hey, we're back, and we're thrilled to be back.
Yeah. Since the time that we first came here, it feels like Salt Lake is growing leaps and bounds. You got the Olympics, the NHL team. Do you feel like the UFC deal was the spark that let other people know that, hey, we could be a destination for you to come here and help us grow as well?
Yeah, I think if I recall, the first year we started talking about our Olympic legacy, right? Sport and Olympic legacy, we've hosted about 1,100 events. I created the organization back in 2000 for Governor Leavitt. And the goal was host major events, trying to get the Olympics back here again to utilize the infrastructure we have in place, and then position Utah in the global sports marketplace. We have an NHL team now. We've got the Olympic and Paralympic Games coming back in 34. I was in Paris for that this year. So certainly the USC was a key part of that. When you look at last year, Chris could probably correct me, but I think the global media value was about $1 billion. So when you start saying it's not just winter sports here, we have a tagline, state of sports, Utah the state of sports. So I think clearly having the UFC as a partner, hosting the pay-per-view events was probably a little unanticipated. But we've always been big in action sports. Tony Hawk's a dear friend. We do Tony Hawk events, action sport events, and fighting and mixed martial arts is a key part of that.
Do you feel now that Salt Lake City has become part of the UFC's calendar as a destination, that it's each year seems to grow a little bit, right? We had the crazy knockout with Leon Edwards and Kamaru Usman. Then the next year we had another crazy knockout with Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje. It feels like almost Salt Lake City is the place where something kind of magical and crazy happens. Do you feel like each time the UFC comes back here, that aura and that sort of ambience around the event is growing?
Well, you guys could probably answer it better than I could, but from my perspective, when you see the kick around the world, hurt around the world, right? You see Gaethje off the octagon do his backflip, and start looking at some of the magical moments here. Clearly there's something here. We feel it's a fit for the community. The community supports it. And again, it fits in this kind of sports portfolio we've created. We have, with the IOC in town last week, spent time with President Bach, the IOC leaders, global property. UFC has become a major global property. So I certainly think with the UFC and it being a fit for Utah and being a fit for what we're all doing, it is.
And on a personal level, right, you mentioned some of your goals to have the NHL come here, UFC come back here, the Olympics come back here. Personally for you, how satisfying is that to know that this was your goal and you're starting to see it play out where Salt Lake City is a destination for these sports and Utah is becoming the state of sports?
I think one of the goals we've, done a great job at evolving into is it's not sports anymore. It's sports and entertainment, right? We had Dwayne Rock. I was with him about 3 or 4 months ago at a WWE event. So you start looking at this world of sports that we all live in. 3 years ago when we first met, nobody would have thought that the convergence of sports and entertainment would have been taking place. Look at the Sphere. So when you look at what's the trajectory of sports, where are we going as a sports industry, where are we going with the MMA, the UFC, Olympics? I had a chance to spend a lot of time with the person over all the Olympic Games. And we talked about sport and entertainment and how important getting to other demographics is becoming. And certainly this whole world of what the UFC is doing, not just as a sports property, but as an entertainment property, I think is creating great value for states and locations that are hosting them. And I think that holds true for Utah as well.
Quick one over here, unrelated to UFC, Olympics, or anything. Was there any update on the hockey team name?
The Utah Hockey Club, my friend. So that's it right now. They actually have been getting input from fans, and there's a list of names. They've whittled it down a bit, but for right now, that's the name they've chosen. And the one thing with SEG, Smith Entertainment Group, and Ryan, you know, we're all about branding Utah. We think everyone wins in Utah, the cities. So I have a hunch it could be the Utah, whatever the name is, just like the Utah Hockey Club, the Utah Jazz, Utah Sports Commission. So we believe here in our community we have the most iconic mountain biking event in the world taking place next week. We had a top 10 football game taking place Saturday. IOC's in town last week. We have you guys this year, this week the UFC. So I really think we're becoming a global sports and entertainment destination, and we'll continue to kind of be pushing that and positioning this as another one. MLB is another.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah, Major League Baseball. I've done this a time or two. Major League Baseball is also on the horizon, and we've already got a commitment from the Miller organization that founded the Jazz, the Delta Center, to help fund that. There's already property been committed, and the legislature has already created funding for that. So I don't think it's a matter if, it's just when we get a Major League Baseball team. And so when you look at when we first spoke 3 years ago, talking about this sports, the evolution of sports, how UFC fit into this as a partner, a global partner, trying to get the Olympic and Paralympic Games back. For me, it's kind of interesting to see it evolve, but hey, like all of you guys, there's always the next story, there's the next thing to do. So we're looking out our window right now saying, what's on the horizon? What are we going to do different? What are we going to do to capitalize not only on what we've done to get to where we are right now, but to continue to build on that?
Jeff, hopefully I can get this out a little bit, because I don't want to infer that obviously like UFC was the first major sporting event to come to Utah. Obviously the Olympics and what the Jazz were doing with the NBA and all that stuff, like sport's been a part of the fabric of the state for a while. But was there a kind of a feeling that this organization coming back year over year sort of primed the pump, if you will, for a lot of the big sporting organizations to kind of want to come through? Because now you see like Black Desert Championship down south with the PGA and the LPGA Tour coming through, and a bunch of like the, obviously you touched on the hockey club and potentially Major League Baseball and whatnot. Like, are kind of the bigger leagues now sort of seeing success of really big organizations like the UFC and sort of looking a little bit more at Utah, I guess?
Yeah, I would think that's fair, although the UFC, since we held the first one in August, has grown and changed remarkably too, right? So it's just not been a static. But I think the relationship we have with the UFC has certainly been something that we can showcase and people can look at. I have people in other cities, other locations say, yeah, what are you guys doing? How do you keep getting the UFC back and pay-per-views? And we've got a great relationship. They've been a great partner. I think we're a good partner and a good fit for them too. So certainly having a marquee event globally like the UFC here is meaningful as we market the state to do other things, sure.
Dana likes to talk in really big platitudes. That's just the nature of his personality and whatnot. But what can you tell us about kind of the long-term prospects of this fight, other UFC fights, that kind of thing with the state?
Well, there's a couple of things. We did a media study before the kick heard around the world. It's an interesting data point. And we said, what was the global media value? I think it was about 700 million. I said, but I want to extend it another 3 months. See what the pickup is after the fight, because we knew there would be a lot of additional media and social and digital value that would be generated from that kick, right? And we ended up about just under 900 million, if I remember right. So again, the value that the UFC has to us in terms of a community event, I think is really, really significant for organizations like ours. We're always trying to look at how do we position the state, how do we do things that will position us for the next opportunity. And Dana, we love Dana, but you're right. He throws platitudes, but I'll also throw some platitudes back to the UFC. They've been a great partner. And you don't do things like this that are meaningful unless you have a great relationship, you have great partners. It's reciprocal. And so we've been very fortunate to have forged a great relationship with the UFC, Dana, Lawrence, Pete Dropick, all of the different staff, Chris here. When they come to town, it just feels like we've known them for a long time. It feels like there's a relationship here that it's symbiotic. And so we look forward to hosting more events in the future, having that continue to grow as, the state of sport. We have the largest senior games in the world hosted here next week down in St. George as well. The mountain biking events in St. George, you got 3 marquee events, Ironman World Championships. So when you start stepping back and say the Olympic and Paralympic Games is over here and just look at what we've done as a community over here, it's pretty remarkable when the Olympic and Paralympic Games just become one of the great things you're doing, but not the great thing you're doing like in 2002. That's pretty remarkable when a community can evolve like that.
Last thing for me, and I just barely kind of thought of this, but obviously having a local fighter on the card now officially in Court McGee, what kind of a big deal is that for, you're talking about community, the fight community obviously, but just the way the Utah community is embraces. Is that a big deal for this event?
Well, yeah, I was just talking to Patrick Fishburne, who's on the PGA Tour. We created with a golfer named Tony Finau mentoring program that he and I created to try to get other players on the PGA Tour. Tony was in the President's Cup last week. So Patrick and I were talking, and whenever you have a local player who's playing, certainly the interest level goes up, and the community supports it. So I would anticipate that would be the case this week as well. But we've always had a great fighting, going back to the Fulmers, we've always had a great fighting vibe here. I think sometimes people haven't seen that, but that's not something that's just happened lately. We've always had a really strong boxing community, fighting community, and so having the UFC here, having Court fight, and also have others who are fighting. And I think, not unlike the Olympic and Paralympics, as we continue to host more of the UFC events, I think you'll see more people training, more people locally getting involved, and I wouldn't be surprised if over the course of the next 10 years you see some emerging fighters from here that are significant. Good. Thanks, guys.